All right, welcome back to Modern Tactical Shooting. Now, I asked via Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook for your questions, and I gotta say to my fans and viewers of this channel, you did not disappoint. Tons of great questions. I want to try and answer as many as I can in this video. Questions about special forces, guns, and gear. So without further ado, let's get into answering your questions right now. So a good portion of the questions I received are about special forces, so let me cover those questions first. With the first question being, Jeff, why did you join special forces? Well, I had already spent 7 years in the infantry. I was stationed in Italy with 1st of the 508, and I had an awesome time while I was in Italy. Did some great deployments, some great training deployments, went to Bosnia. So a lot of great things. Went to Africa to protect the embassy in Uganda, or I think it was Liberia. So lots of great things. And I received orders for the 82nd. Actually, all the squad leaders in the platoon I was in scout platoon at the time. We all got orders at the same time to go to the 82nd. And I was like, well, if I'm going to Fort Bragg, why don't I just try and do something completely different, really take the next challenge and try out for special forces. And really, that's why I joined the Army and I joined the infantry in the first place. Is I was looking for a challenge. I was looking for an adventure. I did great things during those 7 years in the infantry. I was in the first Gulf War. So I was like, you know, it's time to take the next step and take the next challenge. And that's why I went special forces. Now, one good question, did we ever work with Tier 1 units? Yes, early on in GWAT, my team did a few joint hits with Delta. Basically, during the Iraq years, SF were assigned AOs throughout Iraq, and we kind of owned that ground. So if Delta had a target that they want to hit in our AO, they used to give us a courtesy call saying, hey, there's a target we want to hit. Do you guys want to execute the hit with us? And then some Delta guys would come to the team, and we'd do a joint mission to get that target. And then they'd take their prisoners and they'd skate on out and do whatever they did with them. So we did a few joint missions like that, but unfortunately it seemed attitudes started to change, Delta's view of SF, and then later on in GWAT, especially in Afghanistan, zero joint operations or working with them whatsoever. Matter of fact, if they had a mission in a Special Forces AO, they would black out our AO, meaning we wouldn't be doing ops. They would go do their hit. Once they left, then it was game back on with us. So really no working with them whatsoever. So that's kind of a shame. Now, I received multiple questions about physical fitness in Special Forces. What type of physical fitness workouts did we do in Special Forces? What type of combative training? What was my approach to physical fitness in getting ready for SF and selection? So I'll start there. I started training up for selection. Now, this is way back in 1997, about 3 months out. And the key to my workouts is I did 2 events a day to build up my endurance. And so I would do typically a run in the morning, then some sort of rucksack march in the afternoon or vice versa. And I started out wanting to total about 4 to 6 miles a day. And I did that the first month or so. And I worked up to being able to do 2 endurance workouts a day, totaling about 10 to 12 miles. So again, like a 4-mile run in the morning, 5 to 6 mile run in the afternoon, something like that, or rucksack march, trying to do 2 a days, focusing on endurance. Towards the end of my little 3-month train up that I made up, I did an 18-miler because at the time I knew I had to do a 25-miler in selection. Now, every other year they add that or they take it away. I don't know where it stands now, but I knew I had to do a 25-miler. And another thing I did is I used an old school hand gripper to build up my hand strength. In selection during team week, you're going to be dragging heavy stuff or carrying heavy stuff, and you need strong grips. So, old school hand gripper. And lastly, I was old school, soldier from the 90s. I did a ton of push-ups and pull-ups and sit-ups. I had no problem. I could, do 80 push-ups in 2 minutes and then jump up to the pull-up bar and knock out 14 or so pull-ups. So if you're thinking about going to selection, you gotta have some pretty good endurance and some pretty good muscle strength. You don't have to be super jacked. But a good example is you gotta be able to run a 5-miler in 40 minutes or under. And sure, you might be able to do that, but you got to be able to repeat that, say, the next day. So they're looking for consistency. They're not looking for people who peak and then kind of nosedive. You got to be able to maintain a consistency, and that is building up endurance. Now, as to what sort of workouts do you do on teams? Well, on my last tour, we did PT as a team 3 days a week, and it was focused on endurance. We'd go out and do normal runs, we'd do kit runs in body armor, or spice things up and run in body armor and pro mass, rope climbs in body armor, or our workouts would mimic a CrossFit style workout. We did those 3 times a week, and then guys had the other 2 days to work out on their own. Well, we also did workouts in the afternoon. Guys either worked out on their own, or we did combatives twice a week, and I was really big into combatives. My background is kickboxing. I took part in the very first Special Operations Combatives Program class, SOCP. It took place back around 2007, started by Greg Thompson of Team Rock and a Green Beret named Carl Haskins. I actually went through selection with him. Super hard dude, and he's a man destroyer. And SOCP at the time was focused around being able to fight from your blind side. If you got tackled, basically fight your way back to your weapon. And actually, prior to 2007, I wasn't much into combatives at all. I wasn't a big fighter. But thanks to Carl Haskins and his mentorship, he was the first instructor that actually taught in a style that really got me interested into combatives. And from there, I really took off on my own. I started joining civilian kickboxing gyms, things like that. My ground game is pretty weak. I'm not a very strong jiu-jitsu guy at all. I tried a little bit of MMA, really not my thing. I love kickboxing, so that was my thing. And really one of my, I'd say, coolest achievements, besides working on a special forces team, working with all these great guys throughout my career, is I started a kickboxing club back in 2012 on Camp Montron in Bagram, Afghanistan. And the battalion at the time, 4th Battalion, funded it. They gave me about $5,000 to buy a ton of kickboxing equipment. And the rule was, if you knew more than me, then you were going to help teach the class. And I had some really good heavy hitters show up, really knew what they were doing, and it was an awesome time. And what's even cooler is even after I left Afghanistan, that club kept going for like 2 or 3 years after that. And finally, I think when Camp Montron was torn down, might have been 2014, 2015, that club had kept going. So that was pretty cool. I also started a smaller one in 2014 at Camp Dyer out in Jalalabad on Fob Fenty. So 2 different kickboxing clubs, because that was my thing. But I credit Carl Haskins for that. He really got me into combatives, and it changed my life, and I'm a firm believer. Back on the team, though, when we did do combatives, we went super light because you can't afford to get injured in training. You don't want to get injured on a team, so we went super light. But those are the workouts we did and the stuff I got ready way back in '97. All right, next question is actually pretty good, and is during all my years of service, especially during my tours in combat, would I say luck plays a crucial role in surviving combat situations? And definitely yes. Yes, your training and your skills are going to help get you by, but luck plays a huge role in you surviving a firefight. And I'll share with you one story that happened between myself and Dustin Dieter, team leader of my last ODA. We were in Logar province. We had just driven the enemy out of a village with a pretty good firefight. And this is going to sound maybe kind of cheesy, like maybe a scene in an action movie. But if you run into Dustin Dieter, it is completely true, and he will back up everything I'm about to say. So we had just driven the enemy out of a village. We had mounted guns, hammering them with miniguns and 50 cals. We were dismounted, getting it on with our M4s and Mark 18s. We drove them out of a village. And Dustin Dieter, he called me over to one of the vehicles to plan our next move. So we're outside of the vehicle, and I said to him, hey, sir, this is great and all, but we probably need to go into the Kalat, which is basically a fortified house in Afghanistan with a bunch of walls, or maybe duck into a vehicle to plan out our next move. And he's like, really? And as soon as he said that, no lie, a bullet went really right over our heads in between us, several feet away, because you can hear the crack. And it bounced off the armored plate right next to us where our mounted crew member was manning one of the guns. It just pinged right off there. So somebody was aiming at me and the team leader. They just happened to miss. And my team leader credits me with saving his life, because he's like, dang, Jeff, you're right on. We need to get some cover. But yeah, true story. I don't know if this picture is that exact hit on what we call the chicken plate, because honestly, the gunners took so many hits on those armored plates during my last tour, because we were in some thick firefights. By the end of the tour, all those armored plates had bullet strikes on them. I don't know if this is the exact one, but I'm just showing it off here in this photo. Now, speaking of firefights, my next question is, what's the furthest or closest battle you've ever fought in? Well, I've been engaged, and really every soldier can probably share the same experience. In Afghanistan, they love to fight at distance. So it was common to be shot at by PKMs at least 500 yards or even beyond in Afghanistan. That was kind of like a daily thing if you're outside the wire. The closest I've been engaged at, room distance, but it was really rare. It's only happened twice in my life. The average distance that I was presented with threats was probably 100 yards, 100 to 200 yards. So you're talking rifle distance style gunfights. Now my last tour, because my job as a team sergeant, I was always going to make sure I was off the objective last, especially when we were doing mounted operations. So the whole team would leave, I would be the last vehicle off. My vehicle was an RPG magnet and tons of close calls. One of my gunners, one time we were driving and he yelled a swear word, ducked down in the truck, and an RPG had just flown right over his head and barely missed our truck. But honestly, that happened a lot on all the missions, just an RPG magnet. Luck held for us though, we never took a hit. But yeah, I saw all different engagement ranges, and firefights are a funny thing. That one firefight where I just talked about the near miss between myself and the team leader, well, when that firefight first developed, I was on one side of that colot, basically a walled building, and I was fighting it out, trying to direct heavy machine gun fire on a PKM at around 500 yards or so in a wood line. I didn't know exactly where it was, but I had a good idea, so I was trying to get the guns to fire into that PKM. And at 500 yards, you have time to react. I was in a concealed position, shooting my suppressed M4, just trying to find out where the enemy was. And we were taking shots from some other buildings, but it was all around 500 yards. We returned fire with our miniguns and 50 cals Carl Gustavs. We were completely in control of the situation. Now, just 50 yards away, literally on the other side of that building, I had teammates, because we were in a perimeter. They were in a completely different firefight. They had threats within the 100 yards and maybe even closer that were shooting at them from buildings and doorways and windows of all these buildings that were close by. I had no idea that was going on until I walked around the other side of the building when the fighting was all done. I saw all the trees were splintered up from gunfire. Everything was all chewed up. My guys looked a little exhausted, and they were like, hey, wow, that was crazy. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You know, the threats were at least 500 yards away. We had good cover concealment, you know, no big deal at all. Well, these guys had been slinging it out at 100 yards and a little less with their M4s, keeping these enemies at bay. So just within a 50-yard perimeter where our team was, we had really two completely different firefights going on. A nearest style firefight and then a long-range engagement. And honestly, there was probably a better chance of me being shot in the back on my side of the perimeter if I had stood up and shot in the back, had that collat not been between myself and the rest of the teammates from that close firefight that was going on, really just 50 yards away. So yeah, a lot can be going on at the ground, and you will have very little situational awareness sometimes due to stress and being task saturated or task focused on the current threat at hand. But yeah, all different ranges in engagements you're gonna see, especially back in Afghanistan. Yeah. All right, next question. The best foreign special forces units that I have ever worked with. Well, there are a few. First, I got to say the Romanians. There are many Romanian special forces teams that worked hand in hand with U.S. Special Forces in Afghanistan. They worked with us on the FOBs, and they went out and they did missions with us. Those guys are super tough, super brave. So Romanian Special Forces is way up here. Those guys are a bunch of go-getters. I got to also say the Singaporeans. Those guys are super hard. Yeah, hard as nails, the Singaporeans. And a shout out to the Jordanians. A lot of their officers go through our Special Forces Q course or parts of it. Super smart guys. And they have patriotism for their country. You know, they view themselves as, hey, this is Jordan. Jordanian Special Forces, very skilled, very knowledgeable. So I would say those are my top 3 picks for best foreign Special Forces units that I've worked with. So here's a pretty good question. How do I see the SF training pipeline changing from how we did things in GWAT to the shift to fighting a near-peer or peer-to-peer threat? And do I see new weapon systems like the M7 or the XM250? How do I think those are going to affect special forces? So first off, yes, Special Forces does need to change and morph from how we did things in GWAT. Basically, 20 years in Afghanistan and Iraq, a lot of guys joined Special Forces to be gunfighters because we've gotten a lot of gunfights in Afghanistan, leading commandos, the Afghan commandos on missions. You were always going to get in gunfights, and we kind of became gunfight focused, and that's really not what Special Forces is about. That's what the Rangers are good for, getting in there and just crushing stuff. Our main role in Special Forces is really to go into a country and either build up an insurgency and train a guerrilla force to overthrow that country, or train up the current government's forces to defend that country. Really, that's what separates Special Forces from all the other special operations. We're the only ones that can go in with nothing and then stand up a force to really be able to execute whatever you want. And Special Forces, I think, does need to get back to that, infiltrating into a country by all different means, and then being able to train and advise and stand up a force to be able to execute, basically the same capabilities that we can in our modern military. And again, that's what separates Special Forces from the other branches. So I think Special Forces needs to get back to that somewhat. So next question, how many rounds or how long does it take for the average civilian to get as proficient with a firearm as a Green Beret? When it comes to marksmanship, just being able to lay down the lead on a target, I would say your average Green Beret probably shoots about 7,000 rounds a year per caliber. So whether that's pistol or rifle-wise, probably about 7,000 rounds a year average between CQB, flat range training, training exercises out in the field and stuff. Can a civilian get as good with a carbine and a rifle? Sure. Matter of fact, there's plenty of civilians that are better on the flat range than your average Green Beret due to competitive shooting. If you know my channel, I'm a huge fan of competitive shooting. I've gotten as good as I am through shooting in civilian matches. You can learn a lot. You're not going to learn tactics in all these different matches, but you're going to learn how to balance speed and accuracy, and that is the key to good marksmanship. And that's a key to good combat marksmanship, is being able to balance that speed and accuracy. There are tons of heavy hitters out there in the civilian world. In fact, that's one reason why, and I'm going to do a separate video on this, why we brought in your civilian championship shooters to run classes to Green Berets. We weren't looking for tactics, but we were like, hey, why do you shoot so well? How do you shoot so well? Teach us to shoot as well. And in the early days of GWAT, Special Forces sent a lot of us out to all these different civilian shooting schools, or we brought in all these championship shooters. And again, I'm probably going to do a separate video just talking about that. But sure, it's definitely possible to get as good as a Green Beret out on the flat range. All right, another great question. What was my favorite deployment? And really, I have two. My 2004 trip with ODA 591 from 5th Special Forces Group, and of course my last tour, 3rd Special Forces Group back in 2015 on ODA 3122. Now, 591 back in 2004, our mission was to collect intelligence on the growing insurgency and target those insurgents. So we operated in civilian clothes. I kind of talked about it in other videos. Basically act like narco cops, go out and collect intel any way we could on these enemy insurgents and then target them. And that was super cool, going out in two-man teams, basically reconning, gathering intelligence. There was a level of trust by the chain of command that sad to say, I don't think exists anymore, where they were going to trust two guys to go deep into enemy territory to gather intelligence. I don't know if the trust is still there. Hopefully it's there in Special Forces. Hopefully it comes back. But I saw a lot of micromanagement and really lack of trust on teams, just because we had so many layers in the chain of command that just kept increasing, it seemed, every year within Special Forces. Hopefully it comes back. But I did a lot of unique things back on that deployment with my right-hand man, Nate. He knows who he is, Team Blue. We did a lot of crazy things during that low-level mission. And then, of course, 3122, 2015, Afghanistan, working out of Logar, and then later Helmand Province in Afghanistan. It's a SF Green Beret's dream, really, to be a team sergeant leading men in combat. We had the commando mission, which was really viewed as the prestigious role in Afghanistan. There's lots of different missions when you're in Afghanistan. If you get the commando mission, and there are separate commando Kandaks all throughout Afghanistan, so multiple teams can be doing this job all throughout Afghanistan. But again, it's viewed kind of the prestigious job to get, because you're going to lead these guys into some of the heaviest fighting that is around. And that was the pinnacle of my career. So yes, those two time periods and those two Special Forces detachments. All right, time now for some firearm questions. First one being, what is the weirdest firearm I ever saw in service? Now, in combat, we get tons of battlefield guns confiscated from the enemy, and I've seen all sorts of crazy guns, but that doesn't count. What's the weirdest issued Army inventory firearm that I saw in service during GWAT? Well, believe it or not, it was Wehrmacht marked Walter P38 pistols carried by members of 5th Special Forces Group just prior to the 2003 invasion of Iraq. We were deploying over there as a full group, and all our guns and gear had not showed up yet. We were staging in Kuwait, and guys needed to go out into Kuwait to downtown to do stuff and visit other military bases in civilian clothes or in official military attire, and they wanted us to be armed, but all the gear had not showed up yet for all the teams. But the headquarters elements in the group support battalion or group support had showed up, and they brought all the guns that 18 Bravos used to train on. And it's a whole inventory of classic guns going all the way back to World War II. In 5th Group, we had BARs and all these other types of guns, but they're meant for training so 18 Bravos can stay proficient. They weren't meant to be deployed and used. But there weren't enough pistols to go around just for everybody to have one for personal self-defense. So they handed out some Walter P38s, and some of them were German marked from World War II. And yes, those were carried. Now, did any of those Walter P38s cross the border into Iraq? I don't know. By the time all the SF teams did the invasion, all our proper gear had shown up, and we're all rocking M9s at that point. But I don't know if group support people or headquarters elements guys were still carrying those just for the heck of it. It'd be a pretty cool story if anybody did carry one, and they post it down in the comments. I'd love to hear. But yeah, World War II issued Walter P38s were carried for self-defense by members of 5th Special Forces Group just prior to the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Okay, two related questions. What do I think are the necessary items on a modern combat rifle, the necessary requirements? And what do I think of the modern rounds like the new 6.8, the 6-arc round, 6.5 Grendel? Well, there are a lot of parallels between the M7 and the M14 in this development. If we go back to Vietnam, the Army goes from the Garand to the M14 because the M14 is kind of like a Garand. It's got the same controls kind of, and the Army's like, hey, it's almost the same rifle, easy to train on. Of course, we know the problem is the M14 was too heavy, limited to 20-round mags, too much recoil, too large of a rifle to be using in Vietnam. Now here we are with the M7, and I guarantee the Army was thinking the same thing. Hey, the M7 is like an M4, the soldiers are gonna know the controls, but they put a big bullet in it with excessive recoil, the 6.8 round. We're back to 20-round magazines. We're back to less ammo on each soldier due to the weight and the size of the ammo. So the parallels can't be ignored in how it's kind of gone the same way. And if you've seen Garantham's latest video on the RM277, I found that rifle fascinating. A complete departure from really what we know rifles to be. A lot of innovative features. It has the firing from the closed or open bolt to help keep the gun cool. It appears to have less recoil with that new 6.8 round, but I guaranteed the Army was like, wow, that's too radical. And I think what we're gonna see with the M7, I'm convinced it's not gonna last long. I give it 5 years. I think they're gonna look at it, see the limitations of that limited magazine capacity, the excessive recoil, and they're gonna be looking for something else, or maybe downgrading that to just a DMR rifle. Now, why do I bring up the RM277? Well, that's a complete departure from the M4, and just imagine that rifle, but now in, say, 6-arc or 6.5 Grendel. Both those calibers are great 600-meter rounds. I know the 6.5 Grendel is, I've shot it a lot. I don't know the exact operational range of 6-arc, but I'm hearing great things about it. Both those calibers have a lot less recoil than 6.8, and you're back to having 30 round magazines, so you'd have more ammo on board. Just imagine that RM277 in 6.5 Grendel or 6 ARC with 30 round mags. I think that would be a dream to shoot, and I honestly think the Army is missing the boat on it. I think we need to look at guns like that. It's a radical departure from the M4, but I think that's what we really need if we're going to go in a different direction. Time will only tell with the M7. Of course, I could be completely wrong. Soldiers could love it, but I don't think I'm off the mark on this one. All right, next up, M203 versus M320 grenade launchers. What do SF guys think? A lot of your SF members miss the old M203. It was a lot lighter of a grenade launcher when it's mounted on your M4, and we actually had access to them up until about 2014, and then they took them all away, and we started to adopt the M320, I think it was around 2010, and 95% of your Special Forces members rock that standalone configuration. A lot of times we had holsters made for it, so we wear it on your belt, and the beauty of standalone is you can pass it off to fellow teammates as needed. Whereas in the regular Army, and I feel bad every time I see an infantryman with a M320 mounted to the rifle, that thing's super heavy, the balance is all off, and I think it's just way too cumbersome to be mounted on a rifle. But yeah, we do miss the old M203, but yeah, the M320 is a quality grenade launcher. All right, next question. Why all the hate for the M92 or the M9 by Special Forces? Now, I'm going to do a separate video on the history of the M9 with Special Forces. It's probably the most requested video I've seen so far that people want to see, so I'll do that here in the next few months. But in short, why did SF guys hate the M9? Well, mainly for two reasons. The double action, single action trigger, which on double action, the trigger broke on average around 12 pounds. That's pretty dismal. And second up is the decocker. Now in SF, we treated it as a decocker and not a safety, but early on it was kind of treated like a safety, and in the regular Army, they treat it like a safety, and it's the ergonomics is just completely horrible. That's why in SF, we treated it like a decocker. We actually got criticized every time we're on a regular Army base. Hey, you're walking around with your gun on fire. No, it's not a safety lever, it's a decocker, and that's how we were trained. But yeah, the dismal trigger that you have to master 2 trigger pulls, and that safety decocker, and it's kind of a large gun. But yeah, I'll do a separate video on the history of M9 with Special Forces sometime here in the near future. Now, when it comes to gear, a lot of questions about Recce setups. Did we rock Recce style setups in GWAT? What is their practicality today? Should you go with a Recce setup? And my answer to all those questions is really going to ruffle a lot of feathers, and that's because yes, we did roll with Recce style setups early in GWAT, mainly just a chest rack and a rucksack going in doing some stuff. But that was the first couple years in GWAT, and honestly, it's not that practical at all. Why would you knowingly go into harm's way without body armor with just a chest rack? It's actually kind of silly looking back on it. We did the 2003 invasion of Iraq, and maybe only half the SF guys wore body armor because body armor was still a new concept at the time. But as the war progressed and, of course, dragged on, everybody's armoring up. And the level of risk that your chain of command wants to assume, even within Special Forces, they're not hip to the idea of guys rolling out there with just chest racks and no body armor. So chain of command was against it too. And the whole idea of wearing a recce rig and recceing, patrolling in with a giant rucksack, that's just not practical for modern combat. Can you imagine patrolling in with a giant rucksack, setting up a patrol base behind enemy lines like they teach in patrolling? Well, in modern day war, you're going to eat a drone. You're going to get picked up by drones. You're going to eat drones coming out of the air. And the whole rucksack patrolling in is way overblown. And that leads me to another question. What do I think is the most worthless piece of military kit? And that is the modern Army rucksack with that plastic frame. Luckily, in Special Forces, we were spared using that. We used Mystery Ranch packs, and I might do a separate video just on assault packs and backpack used in Special Forces. But that giant plastic frame rucksack is really just a giant laundry bag on your back. And there's only so much weight you can carry on you before it starts to degrade your performance. And nobody's walking around Afghanistan or Iraq with those giant rucksacks patrolling around anywhere. Everybody is wearing full body armor with a 3-day pack at most, because you can only sustain yourself for about 2 or 3 days, and you're going to need support anyways. So those giant rucksacks, they're used to bring all your gear into theater, and they stay at the FOB, and you go out with assault packs. But yeah, the whole Recce chest rack thing, I think it's way overblown on modern social media. I think there's romantic notions surrounding the whole Recce setup with chest rack and just rucksack and patrolling in. It's really not how firefights are, and I don't care what theater we might go to next, I just don't see it happening again. Now, staying on that same subject, for a civilian, what do I think? Chest rack, slick body armor, or some sort of full plate setup? Well, full plate kit setup, yeah, it's useful for full-blown war. And right here I'm modeling my ATS plate carrier. It's rigged up the same way I had it back in 2015, and it's great because it supports your gear for multi-day missions, but it's too bulky. I think as a civilian, try getting in your normal four-seater sedan with this big bulky vest on. It's just not that practical. I think the way to go is a slick plate carrier with a chest rack. That way you can plus it up. All right, next is a pretty good question. I'm going to read it verbatim. What is my general opinion of the gun influencer on social media within the firearms and gear industry as a whole in terms of quality and practicality of products and content? In other words, do I feel that the industry has remained largely pragmatic and based on reality, or has social media really taken over and put it into pageantry and useless crap? Well, I mean, I'm a YouTube guy, and I view firearms content on YouTube. I believe it falls into two different categories. You have your entertainment and you have your information. Now, of course, in your entertainment category, they're still putting out information, but there's a big emphasis on entertainment, and generally those channels do super well. I consider myself an information channel only. And I'm only a part-time YouTuber. I have a full-time job. That's why I only put out about 2 videos a month. And when I first started my channel, it was really just to promote my training side. And I don't view myself as really a full-blown influencer or YouTuber. But yeah, online in the media, there's definitely an entertainment culture where maybe some information's kind of lost. Yeah, there are a ton of bad videos out there when it comes to technique, especially in CQB and shooting techniques. There's a lot of hot garbage out there, but there's also a lot of great stuff out there too. And there's a lot of great information. And right now there's more firearms channels than ever on YouTube. It really is just a matter of sifting through the good stuff and the bad stuff. Do I think social media has degraded the firearms industry? No, I think it's done a good job promoting it. Every time I want to learn something new, I still go to YouTube to learn about it, whether it's working on a gun or seeing what other techniques are out there. So yeah, I think social media is still a good thing, and it's up to your personal choice, you know, what type of videos you like. But I'm not going to poo-poo any YouTubers out there. But yeah, there's definitely more entertainment emphasis channels than probably informational channels, but that's just the way the current, I would say, appetite is right now within the gun culture. Now, speaking of my firearms training, I have not laid on any classes for 2024 yet. I'm getting a ton of demands. It's just that I've been super busy lately. Again, I do this YouTube thing on the side, 2 videos a month, and I do training on the side too. I have a full-time job. I've just moved recently. I'm still in North Carolina, but I just got a lot going on. So honestly, I'm putting off classes probably till September 2024, and I'll open up slots for those classes and start advertising those probably in the middle of the summer of 2024, and they'll take place here in North Carolina, so watch out for those. I've just been really busy lately, so teaching classes has kind of been on the back burner, but I am not completely abandoning it, just postponing it probably till September, just because the summers here in North Carolina are brutally hot, and I'm not looking forward to spending 8 hours on the range in 100-degree weather. But that's it for answering your questions. And really, I got so many questions. I'm super honored and pleased with a lot of interest in my channel and you guys sending in these questions for me to answer. And really, I haven't even answered 1/4 of the amount of questions sent in, but I don't want to make this video too long. So as always, hopefully this video was informational and you learned some things. And you always, of course, have found it entertaining. I'm Jeff Gerwich. Thanks for watching.